My fellow millennials and also you Gen Zers out there, we eat too much avocado toast. We buy too many lattes. We're destroying industries by not supporting kind of dead industries. Let's see, what else do we got? Most of us regret our home purchases. We regret our career choices. And now it turns out we're also terrible tippers. That's according to a recent survey done by creditcards.com. In today's video, we're going to be covering a story from Yahoo Finance titled Gen Z and Millennials Are Terrible Tippers. So let's hop on into this. Before we started, I just wanted to give you guys a little bit of a background or history on tipping. I've kind of seen some videos about this and kind of read about this a little bit in the past. I just did a little bit of cursory research before deciding to make this video. So if you guys have anything to add, if there's anything I'm missing or anything you've heard differently, feel free to drop a comment down below. As far as I could tell, tipping, or kind of the earliest recorded history of tipping, was in the 17th century in England. There was apparently some type of rich, lord or duke or something like that. He had a castle and an estate, and he had servants. And, most of the time, I guess he would pay them their normal wage. But when he would have guests come stay with him and, they took care of his guests and did a good job, he would tip them. And I assume the idea being, he paid his staff to take care of him and his family. But when people came to visit or he had guests or held events and they were, taking, serving, caring for more people, something outside of their normal job, he would tip them. He would give them a little extra. So that's kind of where tipping started. From everything I've kind of read, tipping kind of started off in Europe. It eventually made its way over to the States. Now, it's unclear how exactly it made its way over to the States. It could have been Europeans migrating to the States, or U.S. citizens, people from the U.S. traveling over to Europe and then coming back and bringing it back with them. Tipping, in a way, is kind of a way of like bragging. I have enough money to pay more than I'm supposed to for this service. And so that's kind of how tipping started out. And kind of another interesting thing, as recently as like 1915, 1918, 1920, tipping was actually illegal in a number of states. I think Iowa was one of the states that tipping was illegal in, and it was basically considered a form of bribery. So, I know a lot of people, tipping's kind of a controversial issue. I know there's some people who insist that everybody should tip well. There's other people who say, businesses or restaurants should just pay their employees better and people shouldn't have to tip. I think most people, tip servers at restaurants and things like that, because servers are oftentimes making, $3-4 an hour, and they're relying upon tips. But tipping has kind of gone crazy. I don't know if you guys notice this, but at a lot of coffee shops, smoothie bars, and even kind of fast casual restaurants where nobody's even waiting on you. And this is actually kind of a pet peeve of mine. Let's say there's a restaurant, sort of like Chipotle, right? You go up, you order your food at a counter, you pick up your own food, and then when you're done eating, you throw away your own trash. Should we really be tipping for something like that? Like, what service is really being provided at that point? Like, the people working at these places are making $15 an hour now, right? I think Chipotle is paying $15 an hour now. Nobody's actually serving me or waiting on me. So do I really need to leave a tip? And one thing I've noticed is every place now has these, these front-facing iPads where you swipe your own card and you're looking at the iPad. And most of them, once you pay, it'll say, do you want to leave a 15, 18, or 20% tip? The other day I got a smoothie at Smoothie King, and I actually had to check some like small little hidden box and then click 0% because I wasn't going to tip for somebody making me a smoothie. And they're basically kind of shaming you into not leaving a tip. And, typically I almost always wind up leaving tips in those situations, almost just because I'm kind of shamed into doing so. It's like I don't want to put 0 right in front of the person. This past Friday night, me and my girlfriend were at this kind of Asian Mexican fusion restaurant, right? They had like bulgogi burritos and things like that, and went up to the counter, ordered our burritos and tacos, and then the thing pops up on the screen. Do you want to leave a 15, 18, or 20% tip? So I think I left a 15% tip. We had to pick our own food up from the counter, and then after we were done eating, we went and threw away our own garbage and put our own trays away. So like, what am I really tipping for? Also, the whole concept of tipping is for kind of like superb service, excellent service. So why would I tip before I've actually experienced the service that I'm going to get? And that's actually assuming that I'm even going to get some service. Another kind of weird thing about tipping to me is how certain industries get tipped and others don't. Like, why don't I tip the person who takes my order at McDonald's, but I am supposed to tip the barista who makes me a coffee? I think one of the most over-tipped people are bartenders. Don't get me wrong, I think bartenders work hard. I think they should earn a living, but like, maybe it's just me, but I feel pressure. Like, if I'm at a bar all night, Um, and I rarely go to bars these days, but if I'm at a bar, it's like every time I go grab a beer, I'm going to leave $2 or $3. And if I go up for beers 6 times throughout the night, every time I'm having to drop $2 or $3. And what's the guy really doing, right? Like he's literally grabbing a beer out of the well right in front of him, cracking the top off of it, and setting it on the counter, and that's $2, $2, $2, $2, and then multiply that across everybody that that takes 2 seconds to do, and multiply that across everybody. And then most people don't tip their landscaper. I think I wouldn't say most people don't tip, but it's probably less common for somebody who delivers your new washer and dryer, your new refrigerator. It's less common to tip them. So it's just kind of odd to me how, coffee has been a big thing that people are supposedly supposed to tip for nowadays. It's really weird to me, the things that people do tip for, that it's expected to tip for, and then other things that it's not really expected to tip for. I think like a landscaper, for example, they're getting dirty, they're working out in the hot sun, they're doing really demanding physical labor, and most people aren't going to tip them. But again, they will tip the guy who grabs a beer out of a cooler right in front of them, or the person who pours them a cup of coffee. So the whole societal thing about what industries get tipped is kind of weird to me. But without further ado, let's hop into this article. Gen Z, ages 18 to 24, and Millennials, age 25 to 40. I know in one of the Millennial videos we did the other day, somebody was asking, I'm 24, am I a Millennial or a Gen Z? So depending on kind of who's defining Millennial and Gen Z, there tends to be some crossover. But Gen Z, 18 to 24, and Millennials, 25 to 40, are the worst tippers of all age demographics, according to a new study published by creditcards.com. The study found that Zoomers and Millennials are the least likely to tip for services compared to older generations. I think it's especially relevant now as we continue to dig out of COVID. Ted Rossman, senior industry analyst at creditcards.com, told Yahoo Finance, because the service industry workers we're talking about, these were largely sectors that got crushed over the past year. And I will say the people who tip the best tend to be people who work in the hospitality and service industries themselves. I had a couple girlfriends who are either, bartenders, bottle girls at clubs, waitresses, whatever else. And if I go out to dinner or go out for drinks with one of them, they will rip you a new one if you don't leave at least a 30% tip. So I think people who work in the industry are definitely appreciative of tips and realize how important those are to people working in those industries. So they tend to be the best tippers. And I hope you guys, I know, I feel like I was especially generous during the pandemic. Over the past year, there were a number of restaurants near me that kind of disregarded or bucked lockdowns and stayed open, even when restaurants were supposed to be shut down. And me and most of my friends went out of our way to go out and frequent these restaurants and support these businesses and support the workers. And there's one particular Mexican restaurant I really like who stayed open throughout the whole thing. And me and most of my friends would go there every Friday night. And we'd normally tip about 50%. If it was a $40 tab, we normally leave a $20 tip. If it was a $100 tab, we'd leave a $50 tip. I appreciated them staying open. I appreciated them being willing to work. And, myself and most of my friends were fortunate enough that, our incomes weren't really affected by the lockdowns. And, I think that's kind of what tipping is all about. If you're fortunate, try to pass on some of that goodwill. So during the pandemic, when, like I said, when my income wasn't affected, and I know, waiters, bartenders, barback, servers, their incomes were affected, I tried to be a lot more generous. Back to the article, just 56% of Zoomers and 58% of Millennials said they always tip at sit-down restaurants, compared to 80% of Gen Xers. And that actually really surprises me. I'm surprised that, almost half of Zoomers and Millennials are just leaving a zero tip at a restaurant. That seems pretty shitty to me. Compared to 80% of Gen Xers and 88% of baby boomers. Additionally, 40% of Zoomers and 44% of Millennials said they always tip food delivery people, compared to 65% of Gen Xers and 75% of boomers. And I forget if this article actually gets into this or not. One industry that really gets shafted is like the gig economy food delivery drivers. This has been talked about a lot in the news recently. And I don't know who the fuck, me and some friends were just having a debate about this. If you don't make six figures and you order Grubhub, Uber Eats, all these things several times a week or regularly, you're a fucking idiot. There's just no, a recent study found that I think the average percentage that you're paying over, if you were to go get the food at the restaurant yourself or if you ate in, is anywhere between 33% and 40%. So you're just pissing away money. Not only do these services mark up the cost of the actual food, but then there's a delivery fee, and then you should be tipping on top of that. I think a lot of people do skimp out and don't leave a tip because they feel like, well, I'm paying this markup on the actual food, I'm paying this expensive delivery fee, and people either just feel like they're paying too much and don't want to pay more, or they assume that the delivery driver is getting all or a hefty chunk of that delivery fee. And the reality is that I think I saw a recent study that, Uber, Grubhub, Postmates, I think Postmates is the worst. On average, they're making about $3 per delivery, and sometimes they're driving clear across town, the food's not ready on time. They're spending 30, 45 minutes, even an hour on delivery to make, what, $3? And so I think they're one of the groups that gets kind of shafted. Back to the article, the data followed a similar trend throughout the generations for various other services, including stylists and barbers, taxi and rideshare drivers, hotel housekeepers, coffee shop baristas, and takeout food workers. The study conducted by YouGov surveyed a total of 2,573 adults. Income affects tipping, and this shouldn't come as a surprise. The survey also found that 84% of higher income households, annual household income of $80,000 who go to sit-down restaurants always tip the wait staff, versus 77% of middle-income households, annual household income between $40,000 and $80,000, and 65% of lower-income households, annual household income under $40,000. This may help to explain the age breakdown, as older adults generally have higher incomes. We see a really strong correlation between income and tipping, Rossman said, so I do think that Gen Zers and Millennials will become better tippers as they age. That's something that we've seen in other areas of finance as well. With the hospitality industry being among the hardest hit during the pandemic, 35% of survey respondents said that they plan to tip more generously moving forward. However, when creditcards.com conducted the study last year, 42% of respondents said the same, and there was no significant change in tipping throughout the pandemic to reflect this data, according to Rossman. So essentially their survey found that most people didn't become more generous during the pandemic to try to help out service workers. As for the implications these tipping behaviors may have on employment levels within the hospitality industry, Rossman said that some argue that the non-competitive wages offered to tipped workers may be a contributing factor to the current labor shortage. This part's more anecdotal, but we have heard stories of people that left the service sector because the jobs basically disappeared for so many during COVID, Rossman said. And some people didn't really feel the incentive to go back, whether that was financial or whether that was more of a personal or lifestyle choice. I mean, we can see employment in the leisure and hospitality space is still down 2.2 million jobs. Other findings from this survey, Rossman said that people in general are willing to spend more or tip more freely using debit or credit cards in comparison to cash. And that's kind of true of all types of spending habits, right? Like when you're actually having to physically pull cash out of your wallet and count out money and hand it to people, you're not going to spend as much as when it's just swiping a card and you don't really feel that money going away. Rossman said in general, people are willing to, let's see. According to him, this may be somewhat tied to human nature, as psychology behind parting with actual cash is often seen as more painful than digital money, which we kind of just said. With the pandemic catalyzing a shift to contactless payment methods, Rossman said that this could yield a positive or negative for tipping in the long run. In the case of gig workers, people working for services like Uber, Lyft, and DoorDash, Rossman believes that many people neglect to tip these workers well or not at all because they think delivery fees or the majority of the cost of the service actually goes to the worker, which it does not. We talked about that. I think especially with gig workers, there's often a disconnect between what the customers think the workers are receiving and what the worker is actually receiving, Rossman said. I think if people really knew how much or how little that person was getting paid, they might be compelled to tip better. And I was, excuse me, my throat's all dry. I talked about this in a recent video, but I got back from Tampa. I don't know, I was going to say a couple weeks back, probably a month or two back at this point. But I got back from Tampa, and I was surprised to see that my Uber ride home from the airport, which would normally be like somewhere between $26 and $35, was, I think it was $73 or $84. And I had talked to the driver on the way home, and he showed me what he was making on that ride, and it was $18. So, I think most people know this, or at least most younger people know this. What you're paying and what a gig worker is actually getting are pretty different. Going forward, Rossman suggests that there may be structural changes occurring that may be compelling younger generations to tip less or not at all. I do think that some young adults think it's really unfair that businesses, in some respects, get away with spending less on salaries and then hope customers make up the difference, Rossman said. This is a perception that I've heard from a number of young adults. However, Rossman noted that lower income still remains a primary reason that younger people do not tip as well as their older cohorts. And the thing is, though, that even for better or for worse, right now it is a system and it's hard to rebel against that. Rossman added, because if you tip less, you're not really hurting the business, you're hurting the hardworking person who is then making less. So I thought this article had comments. I always kind of like reading the comments if they got them. Let's see here. Oh, a few comments, okay. See if these load. Come on. Look, let me try to pause this and see if we can get these to load. Okay, so for some reason these comments don't want to load. One thing that I noticed that's kind of interesting just recently, I noticed pretty much all media outlets, but especially Yahoo, had gotten rid of their comment sections in the past year. Obviously the world we're living in right now is like really divisive. Obviously there's a lot of fake news being put out by the media. I think they don't want people calling that out in the comments, but I think they also realize that because how divisive and tribal the world is right now, people are really going to get ugly in the comment section. So a lot of people got rid of comments. I have noticed that they've recently come back. I, for whatever reason, can't get the comments to load here. But I had read some of them earlier, and it was kind of interesting getting different people's insights on tipping, why they tip well, why they don't tip at all. So I'll link to this article if you guys want to check those out as well. I know a lot of times I enjoy reading the comments more than I enjoy reading the actual articles even. But that's all I got for you guys today. I'd love to hear your guys' kind of attitudes towards tipping, thoughts on tipping, from those of you guys in your behavior of tipping others, as well as those of you guys who work in the service industry and what you notice or what you appreciate people would do. So go ahead and drop a comment down below. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up. If you're not subscribed to the channel, click that subscribe button below. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you on the next video.